From the moment she entered the world, Ava was different. Not in a way that made her special to those around her, but in a way that made her invisible, though she could not see that. She was born blind. Her eyes, a pale, cloudy blue, stared aimlessly at a world she could never know the way others did. She didn't scream as loud as other babies, didn't react to the bright hospital lights. Her mother knew something was wrong even before the doctors gave the news. Ava's father didn't say much when the doctors explained her condition. He just stared at his wife, then down at the tiny bundle in her arms, as if hoping the diagnosis would change if he didn't acknowledge it. When they returned home, the silence between them deepened. It wasn't long before her father began spending more time outside, leaving for work early and returning long after Ava was asleep. He never learned to say her name without a tone of resignation, as though she were a mistake he had to endure. Her mother tried, at first. She really did. But the exhaustion, the guilt, the constant demands of caring for a child who couldn't respond like others, wore her down. She would hold Ava in her arms, gently rocking her, but her words, when she spoke, carried a sadness that even a newborn could feel. "I don't know how to do this," she would whisper, more to herself than to the child who couldn't see the tears forming in her eyes. As the years passed, Ava grew, but so did the distance between her and the world around her. She was a quiet child, often sitting by herself, feeling the air, touching objects with an almost desperate tenderness. The other children in the neighborhood avoided her. Some were afraid, others simply didn't know how to talk to her. She never joined their games, never ran or laughed alongside them. And when she did try, they pushed her away, either with cruel words or a pitying silence that hurt even more. School was worse. The teachers, though they tried to be patient, didn't know how to handle a child who couldn't keep up with the lessons. They sent her to sit at the back of the room, telling her to focus on simple tasks while the rest of the class moved on without her. Sometimes they would forget she was there at all. Ava felt the weight of their pity, their frustration. She didn't have to see their faces to know that they were tired of her. Recess was the loneliest part of the day. While the other kids ran across the playground, Ava would sit on a bench, feeling the warm sun on her face, listening to the distant laughter that never included her. Once, a boy sat next to her. He asked her why she was always so quiet. Ava didn't know how to answer, so she stayed silent, feeling the awkwardness grow between them. Eventually, he left, muttering something under his breath. She never heard his voice again. Home wasn't any better. By the time Ava was 6, her mother had given up trying to engage with her. Meals were silent affairs, with her mother placing a plate in front of her and leaving the room. Her father barely acknowledged her presence. It was as if Ava had become an invisible shadow in her own house, drifting from one corner to another, unnoticed and unloved. Her only company was the sounds of the world around her. The birds that chirped outside her window, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. These were the things that reminded her she was still alive, even if no one else seemed to notice. One day, when she was 9, something changed. Ava had been wandering through the house, tracing her fingers along the walls, when she overheard her parents arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were loud, filled with a bitterness she had never heard before. "She's never going to be like the others," her father said, his voice harsh and angry. "We didn't sign up for this. I can't do it anymore." Her mother didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice was soft, almost defeated. "I don't know what to do with her either. She doesn't fit. We can't pretend like this is normal." Ava stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew they didn't love her. She had always known. But hearing them say it aloud, hearing the finality in their voices, broke something inside her. She backed away from the kitchen, her breath coming in ragged gasps. For the first time in her life, she felt truly lost, not just in the dark world she had always known, but in the world of people who were supposed to be her family. That night, as she lay in her bed, she wondered if things would have been different if she had been born normal. If her eyes could see, if her hands could reach out and touch the world the way others did, maybe they wouldn't have turned away from her. Maybe they would have tried harder to love her. But Ava wasn't normal. She never had been, and she never would be. As the years went on, Ava learned to expect rejection. She stopped trying to make friends, stopped asking questions. She became quieter, almost invisible, even to herself. She would sit for hours, listening to the sounds around her, trying to imagine what the world looked like, what the faces of the people she passed on the street might be. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't picture it. The darkness was all she knew, and it had become her only comfort. The rare moments when someone did reach out to her were fleeting, filled with pity rather than genuine care. There was the teacher who offered extra help but quickly gave up when Ava didn't catch on fast enough. The neighbor who brought her a pie for her birthday but never came back. The classmates who invited her to join them once, only to make fun of her when she couldn't keep up. Each time, the rejection stung, but with every passing year, it hurt a little less. Ava's heart had built a wall around itself, a wall made of years of loneliness and pain. It was safer that way. If she didn't let anyone in, they couldn't hurt her anymore. But deep down, in a place Ava rarely let herself think about, she still longed for something more. She wanted to be seen, to be loved, to be something more than the blind girl everyone pitied but never truly cared for. Ava was 13 when the questions in her mind became impossible to ignore. She had been sitting on the porch, listening to the faint buzz of the world around her, when a realization hit her with a quiet force. What did people see when they looked at her? She had spent her whole life being pushed aside, ignored, and pitied, but she had no way of knowing what made her different in their eyes. What did her blindness look like to those who could see? Was it written all over her face? Did her body somehow give her away as someone undeserving of affection or care? She couldn't ask her parents. That door had long been shut. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, had become a functional silence. Her mother cooked meals for her. Her father sometimes drove her to the school or a doctor's appointment. But beyond those acts, they lived separate lives. They shared a house, but it never felt like a home. Ava was a ghost within those walls, never touched, never spoken to beyond necessity. Her loneliness reached a peak that summer. The kids in the neighborhood had grown older, and their teasing had turned into something colder, more deliberate. They weren't afraid of her blindness anymore. Instead, they seemed to be angry about it. Some of them would throw things in her direction, daring each other to see if she'd flinch or react. Others would leave her sitting alone when she tried to follow the sound of their voices. Their cruelty stung like an invisible wound, deep and unseen, but ever present. She started avoiding the outside world altogether. The porch, once her small refuge, became a place she dreaded. It wasn't just the kids' taunts, but the way the whole world seemed to watch her and yet never truly see her. Every time someone's footsteps passed her by without a word, it reminded her that she was alone, in more ways than one. But Ava couldn't avoid the world forever. Her school demanded attendance, and though she often fantasized about simply staying home, there was a part of her that still longed for something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the hope, however faint, that things could be different. In her 9th grade year, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while sitting alone on a bench outside the school, she heard footsteps approaching. She braced herself, assuming it was another student coming to make fun of her or pass by without a word. But this time, the footsteps stopped right in front of her. A soft voice, unfamiliar but gentle, broke through her isolation. "Hey, is this seat taken?" Ava was startled. No one had asked her that before. Most kids just avoided her, and the few who didn't either laughed at her or ignored her completely. She hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of trick, but then she nodded slowly. "No," she replied, her voice quiet and unsure. "You can sit." The girl sat down next to her. She didn't speak right away, and Ava could hear her fidgeting, as if she was unsure of what to say next. Finally, after a few moments, she introduced herself. "I'm Lily. I'm new here. I don't really know anyone yet." Ava turned her head slightly toward the voice. "I'm Ava," she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked for her name. They sat in silence for a few more minutes, the awkwardness between them slowly fading into something more comfortable. Lily didn't ask any of the usual questions. She didn't mention Ava's blindness, didn't ask her how she got around or if she needed help. Instead, she talked about herself, about how her family had just moved to town, how nervous she was about starting at a new school, and how she missed her old friends. Ava listened, surprised at how easy it was to just be there with someone who wasn't looking at her like she was broken. After that day, Lily started sitting with Ava more often. She didn't force conversation, didn't try to make Ava talk when she wasn't in the mood. But her presence was something new and warm in Ava's life. For the first time, she didn't feel completely invisible. Someone had chosen to be with her, to spend time with her, without expecting anything in return. It wasn't long before the other kids noticed. At first, they were confused. Why would someone like Lily, who seemed normal and happy, spend time with the blind girl who never talked? Whispers started to follow them in the hallways, but Lily didn't seem to care. In fact, she seemed to push back against it in her own quiet way. Whenever someone would make a comment, she would stand a little closer to Ava, or laugh a little louder, as if daring the world to question their friendship. For Ava, this was entirely new. She had never known what it was like to have someone defend her, to have someone care enough to fight for her in even the smallest of ways. She had spent her entire life being ignored or rejected. And now, here was someone who didn't just tolerate her, but wanted to be around her. It was overwhelming at times, and Ava found herself pulling back, afraid that it was all too good to be true. Surely, she thought, Lily would eventually see her for who she really was. A burden, someone who wasn't worth the trouble, and leave like everyone else had. But Lily didn't leave. Instead, she started showing up at Ava's house after school, knocking on the door and asking if she wanted to go for a walk or just sit outside and talk. Ava's parents were baffled. They had never seen Ava with a friend before, and they didn't know what to make of this new girl who seemed so determined to bring their daughter out of the shadows. Her mother, in particular, seemed almost resentful, as if Lily's presence was a reminder of all the things she had failed to give Ava over the years. But Ava didn't care. For the first time in her life, she had something to look forward to. She started feeling less afraid to leave the house, less afraid to be out in the world. With Lily by her side, the stares and whispers didn't feel as sharp, didn't cut as deep. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be something more than the blind girl everyone pitied. Yet, as the months passed, something began to nag at Ava. She couldn't shake the feeling that her friendship with Lily was built on a lie, or at least, an incomplete truth. Lily had never asked about her blindness, never treated her any differently because of it, and while that had been a relief at first, it now felt like a weight. Ava had spent so many years being defined by her blindness that she didn't know who she was without it. Was Lily really her friend, or was she just being nice because she felt sorry for her? Did she really see Ava for who she was, or was she only pretending not to notice the things that set her apart? One day, after they had been walking through the park together, Ava couldn't keep it in any longer. She stopped in her tracks, her hand gripping Lily's arm as she turned to face her. "Why are you friends with me?" Ava asked, her voice shaking. Lily looked confused. "What do you mean?" Ava swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I mean, you could be friends with anyone. Why did you pick me? I'm blind. I'm different. People don't usually want to be around me." Lily was quiet for a moment, and Ava's heart sank. This was it, she thought. This was the moment when Lily would finally admit that she had only been hanging out with her out of pity, that she didn't really care. But then, Lily reached out and took Ava's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I'm friends with you because I like you, Ava," she said softly. "Not because you're blind, not because I feel sorry for you. You're kind, you listen, and you make me feel like I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't care if you can't see. I see you. That's what matters." Ava felt a lump rise in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She had spent her entire life believing that her blindness was all anyone could see, that it was the thing that defined her in the eyes of the world. But here was Lily, telling her that she was more than that she was worth something just as she was. For the first time in her life, Ava felt seen, not just as the blind girl, but as Ava.